When I went to my ex-wife's house, I found my daughter unconscious outside the door. My ex-wife shrugged. She's just being disciplined. Her new husband stood beside her, coldly looking at my daughter. I called an ambulance, but when the paramedic saw my ex-wife, he turned pale and whispered, "Sir, that's your wife." Actually, but before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now let's dive into today's story. Trevor Hensley had learned to keep his emotions under control. It had taken him 3 years to get good at it. 3 years of biting down on words he wanted to say. 3 years of reading text messages twice before answering. 3 years of standing in driveways with his hands in his pockets, counting silently to 10 while Candace explained why the schedule needed to change again. After the divorce, control had stopped being a personal quality. It had become a survival skill. They had been married for 11 years. The marriage had ended the way most marriages end, slowly and then all at once. There were arguments about money, arguments about the second mortgage, arguments about whose fault it was that the house always felt cold even when the heat was running. Trevor had eventually accepted a simple fact. He and Candace would never be friends. They would never sit across from each other at a school play and share a joke. They would never text each other about anything that was not strictly necessary. But they had one responsibility neither of them could walk away from: their 9-year-old daughter, Lila. Every other Friday, Trevor drove 20 minutes across Bellmere, Ohio, to pick her up. He knew the route so well he could have driven it with his eyes closed. Past the shuttered tire shop on Ridge Street. Past the Lutheran church with the crooked sign. Past the elementary school, where Lila had once won a certificate for reading 40 books in a summer. He always left work early on those Fridays. His supervisor at the plant had stopped asking why. Everybody knew. Trevor Hensley took Friday afternoons, and Trevor Hensley made up the hours on Sunday without complaining. That particular Friday, the sky over Bellmere had gone the color of dishwater. The air smelled like rain that had not arrived yet. Trevor had the truck window cracked 2 inches because the heater fan made a noise he had been meaning to fix since February. He turned on a Hollis Court at 4:18. He remembered the time because the dashboard clock ran 3 minutes fast, and he had corrected it in his head, the way he always did. Then he saw the front yard. Lila's pink backpack was lying beside the front steps. Not leaning, not set down, lying on its side, one strap twisted underneath it, the zipper half open with a corner of a folder sticking out. Her favorite blue jacket was on the ground 3 feet away, and Lila was lying beside the front door. Trevor's foot came off the gas before his brain finished processing what he was looking at. The truck lurched. He slammed it in a park at an angle across the curb, and the seatbelt caught him hard across the chest as he threw the door open. "Lila!" His voice came out wrong, too high. He did not recognize it. He ran. The lawn was soft from the week's rain, and his boots sank slightly with every step. He was aware, in some distant part of his mind, of the neighbor's wind chime rattling and a dog barking 2 houses down, and the smell of cut grass. Those details would stay with him for years. She did not move. Her eyes were closed. Her head was turned to one side against the concrete step. Her mouth was slightly open. There was a smear of dirt on her cheek where her face had touched the ground. Trevor dropped to his knees, so hard the impact went up through his hips. "Lila. Sweetheart. It's Dad." "Nothing. Lila." He put his hand on her shoulder. She was warm through her shirt, but her hands were cold. That difference registered as deeply wrong. "Lila, look at me." Her breathing was shallow. He could see her chest moving, but barely, and there was a slow rhythm to it that did not match anything he had ever seen when she was sleeping. He had watched that girl sleep 1,000 nights. He knew what her sleep looked like. This was not it. He pressed 2 fingers to the side of her throat. His hand was shaking so badly he could not tell at first whether he was feeling her pulse or his own. Then he found it. Slow. Steady enough. There. He got his phone out of his back pocket and dialed with his thumb while keeping his other hand on her chest, as if holding her would keep her breathing. 911. "What's the address of your emergency?" 14 Hollis Court, Bellmere. His voice had gone flat. Something in him had switched over. "My daughter is unconscious. She's 9. She's breathing, but she won't wake up. Is she injured? I don't know. I just got here. Stay on the line with me, sir. Behind him, the front door opened. Trevor turned his head. Candace stood in the doorway with a dish towel in her hand. He would think about that towel later. He would think about it a great deal. She had been drying dishes. She did not look frightened. She did not gasp or run down the steps or push him aside to get to her daughter. She looked down at Lila the way a person looks at a chair that has been left in the wrong place. Then she folded the towel over her arm and crossed her arms. She's fine. Trevor stared at her. She's unconscious. Candace sighed. It was a small sound. Practiced. She's been acting like this all week. She wants attention. The dispatcher was still talking in his ear. Trevor barely heard her. He looked back at his daughter, at the dirt on her cheek, at the backpack lying in the grass where it must have slipped off her shoulder while she went down. How long has she been out here? I don't know. A while. Candace shifted her weight. She was told to come in. Behind her, another shape filled the doorway. Bryce Callahan was a tall man with gray at his temples and a permanent expression of irritation, as though the world had been assembled slightly wrong and he had been asked to sign off on it anyway. He had a beer in one hand, not a full one. Trevor noticed that too. Bryce came out onto the top step and looked down at Lila without bending. She does this when she doesn't get what she wants. Trevor stood up. He did it slowly. He was aware of the wet grass soaking through the knees of his jeans. He was aware of his own heartbeat in his ears. He was aware that if he moved any faster than he was moving, something inside him was going to come loose and he would not get it back. Don't say another word. Bryce raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? My daughter is unconscious. Trevor's voice was quiet. That was what made it land. You're standing over her with a beer telling me she's doing it on purpose. I'm telling you what we've been dealing with. Trevor let the word sit in the air. Candace stepped down onto the walk. Trevor, don't make this a scene. The neighbors. I don't care about the neighbors. A siren started somewhere across town. Distant. Rising. Trevor turned his back on both of them and knelt again. He took Lila's cold hand in his and rubbed it between his palms, the way he had done at the bus stop on winter mornings when she was 6 and refused to wear mittens. They're coming, he told her. You hear that? They're coming, and I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere. Her eyelids fluttered. Not opening, just moving. Behind him, he could hear Candace saying something to Bryce in a low voice. He could not make out the words. He caught the tone, though. It was not fear. It was the tone she used when a plan had gone off schedule. Trevor kept his eyes on his daughter. That's all that matters, he said to no one. That's all that matters right now. The siren got louder. The ambulance turned on a Hollis Court with its lights running and its siren winding down. And Trevor felt something in his chest let go by half an inch. 2 paramedics came through the gate fast, one pushing a bag ahead of him, the other swinging the gate wide so it banged against the fence post. A neighbor across the street had come out onto her porch. Somewhere a screen door slapped shut. The first paramedic was older, maybe 55, built thick through the shoulders, with a gray brush cut and forearms that looked like he had spent 30 years lifting people who did not want to be lifted. His name tag said Reeves. Trevor had seen him around town, at the hardware store, at the high school football field on Friday nights. Gordon Reeves went down on one knee beside Lila, without a word of introduction, and put his hands on her. Hey there, sweetheart. Can you hear me? He rubbed his knuckles firmly against her breastbone. Lila's eyebrows drew together. Her arm moved a few inches. Then she went slack again. She responds to pain, Gordon said over his shoulder. Not to voice. His partner, a younger man with a shaved head, was already unrolling a blood pressure cuff. Gordon touched the back of his hand to Lila's cheek, then to her fingers. She's cold. He said it flatly, but Trevor caught the pause after it. Half a beat too long. How long has she been outside? I don't know. Trevor made himself answer clearly. I got here about 3 minutes before I called you. She was already like this when I pulled up. You didn't move her? No. I checked her pulse. That's all. Good. Gordon glanced up at him for the first time. That's the right answer. The younger paramedic read out numbers. Blood pressure. Pulse. Oxygen. Trevor did not understand most of it, but he understood the way Gordon's mouth tightened. Any medical history? Diabetes, seizures, anything? No. Nothing. She's healthy. She's never even broken a bone. Any medications in the house she could get into? Trevor opened his mouth and stopped, because he realized he did not know. He had not been inside that house in over 2 years. Candace answered for him from the walkway. She refused to eat. She's been like this all week. She was being difficult. Gordon Reeves looked up. It was not a quick look. He turned his head, found Candace's face, and stayed there. His hands kept working, steady and automatic, but his eyes did not move. 5 seconds. 6. Candace shifted. You okay? Gordon did not answer. He looked back down at Lila and pressed his fingers to the inside of her wrist, and then he said quietly to his partner, "Bring the cot. Let's not stand around." The younger man went. Trevor watched all of it. He had spent 11 years learning to read Candace's face, and he had spent 3 years since learning to read the faces of people who dealt with her. He knew what he had just seen. It was recognition, not the kind where you place a face from the grocery store. The other kind. They got Lila onto the stretcher. Her head lolled, and Gordon caught it with one broad hand and settled it against the pad like he was setting down something breakable. He strapped her in. He tucked a blanket around her, and then he tucked it a second time, tighter, at her feet. The wheels clattered on the walkway. Gordon caught Trevor's arm at the back bumper of the ambulance, just for a second, and turned him half away from the house. "Sir, is that your wife?" Trevor shook his head. "Ex-wife." Something moved behind Gordon's eyes. Actually, he stopped himself. His jaw worked. "Have we met before? You and me?" "No, I don't think so." Gordon was not looking at Trevor anymore. He was looking past him, at Candace, who had come down the steps and was standing at the edge of the driveway with her arms folded. Candace answered before Trevor could. "No, we haven't." Gordon turned his whole body toward her. "Yes," he said, "we have." Bryce came down off the porch fast, the beer gone now, his hands loose at his sides. "You've got the wrong person, buddy." Gordon ignored him completely. He did not raise his voice or square up. He simply turned back to the stretcher and checked the strap across Lila's chest and adjusted the oxygen line at her nose. 20 years of being shouted at in driveways had taught him something, and Trevor could see it working. Then Gordon leaned close to Trevor and spoke low, under the noise of the idling engine. "I've responded to an emergency involving her before." Trevor's stomach tightened into a hard knot. "When?" Gordon's eyes went to Candace, then back. "Several years ago." Trevor turned to look at his ex-wife. Candace's expression had changed. All afternoon she had been irritated, inconvenienced, embarrassed by the neighbors. Now, for the first time since he had pulled into the driveway, she looked genuinely nervous. Her hand had come up to her collarbone. Her weight had shifted back toward the house. She saw him looking. She dropped the hand. "He's confused," she said. "Trevor. He's confused." Gordon climbed halfway into the back of the ambulance and then paused with one boot on the bumper. "I can't discuss another patient's history with you. I want you to understand that. That's not me being difficult. That's the law, and I'd lose my license." "Then what are you telling me?" Gordon looked at him for a long moment. Rain had started, very light, ticking on the roof of the ambulance. "I'd strongly recommend you tell the hospital everything you know. Everything. Even the stuff that sounds like it doesn't matter. Especially that." Trevor's throat had gone dry. "What aren't you telling me?" Gordon answered carefully, choosing every word like a man walking across ice. "I'm telling you to make sure they document everything." He reached down and offered a hand. "You riding with us?" "I'll follow. I've got my truck." "Then follow close." The doors shut. The ambulance pulled off the curb. Trevor stood in the rain for exactly 2 seconds, and in those 2 seconds he did the arithmetic that would define the next 11 months of his life. Behind him, Candace said, "I'll get my keys." Trevor did not turn around. "Take your time," he said. He walked to his truck, got in, and gripped the wheel until his knuckles ached. Then he pulled out after the ambulance and did not look at the house in the mirror. Lila's pink backpack was still lying in the grass. He noticed that, and he made himself remember it. Bellmere Memorial had a waiting room with a television bolted near the ceiling and a coffee machine that had been out of order long enough for the sign to yellow. Trevor did not sit down for the first 40 minutes. They took Lila straight back through the double doors. A nurse asked him for her date of birth, her allergies, her insurance. He answered everything without hesitating. Then she asked who her primary care doctor was, and Trevor realized he did not know that either, because Candace had switched pediatricians at some point and had never told him. He wrote that down on the back of a parking receipt. Not the doctor's name, the fact that he did not know it. Gordon Reeves passed him once in the corridor, walking out with his partner, stripping off a pair of gloves. He met Trevor's eyes and gave him a small nod. Nothing more, but he slowed down a half-step as he passed, and that half-step said more than a conversation would have. Candace and Bryce arrived 20 minutes after that. 20 minutes. It was a 20-minute drive from Hollis Court if you obeyed every light. Trevor did the math on that too. Candace came through the doors already talking. Where is she? What are they saying? Nobody's called me. They took her back. Well, I'm her mother. She went to the desk. She used a particular voice at the desk, warm and slightly breathless, and Trevor watched the nurse's shoulders soften in response. He had seen that voice work on teachers, on his own mother, on a judge. When she came back, she sat down 2 seats from him and immediately began explaining. Lila has anxiety. Trevor said nothing. She's been diagnosed. It comes out physically. That's a real thing, Trevor. It's not something I made up. Bryce sat on her other side with his elbows on his knees. She's been having behavioral problems since the spring. Tantrums. Won't eat. She locks herself in the bathroom. Trevor turned his head and looked at both of them. Neither of you mentioned that before. I didn't think you'd take it seriously. You didn't think I'd take it seriously that my daughter has been having tantrums and refusing food for 6 months. Candace crossed her arms. You don't know everything that happens in my house. Apparently, Trevor said, I don't. He got up and walked to the window and stayed there. Outside, the rain had thickened. Cars came into the lot with their wipers going. He watched a man help an elderly woman out of a sedan, holding an umbrella over her head and getting soaked doing it. He thought about Lila's cold hands. He thought about a night the previous winter, at his apartment, when Lila had fallen asleep on the couch at 7:30 in the middle of a movie she had been begging to watch for a week. He had carried her to bed and thought, she must have had a busy week at school. He had been proud of himself for not waking her. He thought about the weekend in June when she had slept until 11 and he had joked that she was turning into a teenager early. He thought about the Sunday she had cried when he pulled into her mother's driveway, and how Candace had come out and said, she does this, and how he had believed her, because it was easier, because it was Sunday, because he had work in the morning, because arguing with Candace in a driveway had never once gone his way. Trevor pressed his palm flat against the cold glass. He had believed her. Every time. That was the thought that would not leave him alone. A doctor came out at 7:10. She was in her early 40s, dark hair pulled back, reading glasses pushed up on her head, and she had a way of speaking that did not waste anything. Her badge said, A. Hartwell, M.D. Are you Lila's parents? Yes, Candace said, standing. I'm her father, Trevor said. Dr. Hartwell looked between them and did not comment. She's stable. Her vitals have come up. She's still very drowsy, but she's responding now, and that's what we wanted to see. Trevor's legs went weak. He locked his knees and stayed standing. What happened to her? That's what we're working on. Hartwell folded her arms loosely. We've examined her thoroughly. There's no head injury, no fracture, no sign of a fall, no infection that we can find. Her scan is clean. Then why did she collapse? We don't know yet. The doctor paused. It was a short pause, but Trevor caught it. Some of her blood work is abnormal. We've sent additional panels out. Candace stepped forward. What does that mean, abnormal? It means some values aren't where I'd expect them to be in a healthy 9-year-old, and I want to know why before I say anything more. But you're still testing. We're still testing. Candace's hand went up to her collarbone again. Could this be psychological? She asked. Because she has anxiety. She's been under a lot of stress. Dr. Hartwell looked at her for a moment. Not until we've ruled out medical causes, she said. In a child this age, we do that first. Always. Of course, Candace said quickly. I only meant. I understand what you meant. Trevor watched Candace's face while the doctor spoke. He watched the exact moment her jaw set. She was not relieved that her daughter was stable. She was calculating something. He filed that away too. Can I see her? He asked. One at a time, and briefly. She needs rest. Candace moved first. I'll go. Actually, Dr. Hartwell said. She asked for her dad. The silence that followed lasted 3 seconds and cost Candace something. Trevor saw it happen. So did Bryce, who looked at the floor. Trevor followed the doctor down the corridor. Lila was in a bed that was too big for her, under a thin white blanket, with a pulse monitor clipped to her finger. The lights were dimmed. Machines made their small sounds. Her eyes opened as he came in. Hey, Trevor said. His voice cracked on one syllable, and he did not care. Hey, kiddo. Dad. He got to the bed and took her hand, and this time it was warm. I'm here. I've been here the whole time. I'm sorry. Her eyes were wet. I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. You have nothing to be sorry for. Nothing. Do you hear me? She nodded, but she did not look convinced. She looked like someone who had been apologizing for a long time. Are you hurting anywhere? My head. And I feel weird. She swallowed. Like when you stand up too fast, but it doesn't stop. Okay. I'm going to tell the doctor that. I fell asleep, Lila said. I didn't mean to. I was waiting for you on the step because I wanted to see your truck come. And then I got so sleepy, Dad, I couldn't. She stopped. Her eyes had gone past him to the doorway. Trevor turned. Candace was standing in the hall, visible through the glass, watching. Lila's whole body changed. Her shoulders came up. Her hand closed hard around Trevor's fingers, hard enough to hurt, and her breathing went fast and shallow, and the monitor beside the bed picked up the change and began to beep faster. Don't let Mommy take me home. Trevor froze. Lila, please. She was gripping his sleeve now with both hands. Please, Dad. Please don't let her take me home. Please. Out in the hallway, Candace's voice came sharp through the doorway. Lila. Lila flinched. Her whole small body flinched. And then she was crying, the ugly, exhausted crying of a child who has been holding something for a long time and cannot hold it anymore. A nurse came in fast. Trevor stood up. He stepped between the bed and the door, and he did not raise his voice, and he did not swear, and he did not point. Everyone out. She's my daughter, Candace said from the hall. You do not get to, everyone. Out. Something in his face must have been new, because Candace stopped talking. The nurse looked at Dr. Hartwell. Dr. Hartwell looked at Trevor for a moment, and then she turned to the hallway and said, calmly, Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to wait in the family area. This is ridiculous. It isn't a request. For the first time in 3 years, Trevor Hensley was not asking for anything. He was telling. He sat back down beside the bed and let his daughter cry into his shoulder, and over the top of her head, through the glass, he watched Candace stand in the hallway with her arms folded and her eyes on him. And Trevor understood something with total clarity, the way a man understands that a bridge has washed out. She was not worried about Lila. She was worried about what Lila might say. Lila stayed at Bellmere Memorial through Saturday. By Sunday afternoon, she was awake and eating and asking for a tablet, and Dr. Hartwell discharged her with instructions and a follow-up appointment. There was a conversation in the corridor about where she would go. It was a short conversation, and it happened because Trevor had already called his attorney from the hospital parking lot on Friday night, standing in the rain with his phone against his ear. Lila went home with him, temporarily, pending the follow-up. Candace signed the form with her jaw clenched so tight the pen shook. Trevor slept on the floor of his own living room that night because Lila did not want to be in a room alone, and he did not want her to be either. On Monday morning, he called into the plant, and then he drove to Bellmere Elementary. The building smelled like floor wax and paste, and the particular dusty warmth of radiators coming on for the first time in autumn. Megan Prescott's office was at the end of the hall, behind a door with a felt sunflower on it. She was younger than Trevor expected, maybe 30, with her hair in a clip and a coffee mug she was holding with both hands even though it had clearly gone cold. When he introduced himself, she closed her eyes for a second. Mr. Hensley. She set the mug down. I've been trying to reach you. Trevor stopped in the doorway. About Lila? She nodded and gestured to the chair. He sat down. The chair was too small. Everything in the room was too small. Trying to reach me how? I left 2 voicemails. In April, and again in August. On what number? Megan turned to her computer and clicked twice. Then her face changed. She turned the monitor slightly, so he could see it. There was one contact number listed for Lila Hensley under both parents. It was Candace's cell phone. Trevor looked at it for a long moment. "That's not my number," he said. "That has never been my number. I can see that now. Who fills that form out?" "The custodial parent, at registration each August." Megan's voice was steady, but her hands had gone still on the desk. "I should have checked. I'm telling you honestly, I should have checked, and I didn't because I had no reason to think." "Don't." Trevor held up a hand. He was not interested in watching someone apologize. He was interested in what was on that desk. "Tell me about my daughter." Megan took a breath. "She changed. Several months ago. I want to say February, but it was gradual, so it's hard to put a date on it." "What kind of change?" "She stopped eating lunch." Trevor sat back. "She was always a good eater. She's the kid who asks for seconds." "I know. That's what her second-grade file says, too. Good appetite, social chatty." Megan opened a manila folder and turned it toward him. "This is what this year looks like." Trevor did not touch it yet. "Keep going." She started asking strange questions. "What questions?" Megan hesitated. She was choosing her words, and Trevor recognized it as the same careful choosing Gordon Reeves had done at the back of the ambulance. "In March, she asked me whether her mother could stop her from seeing you." Something turned over in Trevor's chest. "Stop her how?" "She didn't say. She asked whether a judge could do it, and whether it would happen if she got in trouble at school." Megan's mouth tightened. She was very worried about getting in trouble, more worried than the situation ever called for. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that adults sort out those arrangements and that it wasn't her job to worry about it." Megan looked at her hands. "I gave her the answer you're supposed to give. I've thought about that answer a lot in the last 3 days." Trevor pulled the folder toward himself but still did not open it. "You said questions?" "Plural. In May, she asked me whether adults could get in trouble for giving children medicine." The room went quiet. Trevor could hear a class moving through the hallway outside, sneakers and voices. A teacher saying, "Line up, please." "Say that again." Megan said it again, exactly the same way. Trevor's chest had gone tight in a way that had nothing to do with grief. It was colder than that. "Did she say her mother was giving her medicine?" "Not directly. No." "What exactly did she say?" Megan turned a page in the file and read from her own handwriting. "She asked, and I wrote it down because it struck me as unusual. She asked, if a grown-up gives a kid medicine and the kid isn't sick, is that against the law?" Trevor did not move. "And I asked her why she wanted to know," Megan continued, "and she said she saw it on a TV show. And then she asked to go back to class." "Did you believe her?" "No." "Then why didn't you call me?" Megan looked up and met his eyes and did not flinch, and Trevor gave her credit for that. "2 reasons. The first one is the phone number, and that one is on this school, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. The second is that every single time I tried to ask Lila directly, she became frightened." "Frightened how?" "She would shut down. She'd say she made it up. She'd say she was being dramatic." Megan paused. "She used that word. Dramatic. That's not a 9-year-old's word, Mr. Hensley. Somebody gave her that word." Trevor knew exactly who. He opened the folder. There were months of notes inside. Dated, initialed, filed. A record kept by a woman who had known something was wrong and had not known what to do about it. Lila asleep at her desk during morning math. 3 separate entries in April. Lila asleep during a fire drill. That one had a note beneath it in Megan's handwriting. Had to be shaken awake. Took nearly a minute to orient. Lila refusing to line up for dismissal. Twice in May. Once she had hidden in the reading corner and had to be coaxed out. Lila wearing a long-sleeve sweatshirt during the last week of school, when the classroom thermometer read 81 degrees. She had refused to take it off. Nurse reported no marks or bruising observed, but child would not roll sleeves. Lila telling her 4th-grade teacher in September that she was tired all the time. Lila crying in the bathroom on a Friday. Trevor turned the pages slowly. He read every line. He did not skip anything. He was aware that his hands were steady, and he was faintly surprised by that. When he reached the end, he closed the folder and set his palm flat on top of it. "Why am I seeing this now?" Megan Prescott did not look away. "Because after what happened Friday, I don't think we can treat these things as isolated anymore." Trevor nodded slowly. No, he said. We can't. He stood up. I need copies. All of it. Dated. And I need to know who else has seen these. I've already made them. They're on the printer. She stood too. And I filed a report with the county. I did that Saturday morning. I want you to know that. Trevor looked at her. Thank you. You don't have to thank me. I should have done it in April. Yes, Trevor said. You should have. He said it without heat. He was not going to soften it for her. But he took the copies, and he shook her hand, and at the door he stopped. One more thing. If anyone from her mother's household comes to this school, for any reason, on any pretext, you call me. Not the number on that form. This one. He wrote it on the back of Megan's own notepad, in block letters, and pressed hard enough to leave an impression on the page underneath. Detective Colin Mercer had a small office on the second floor of the Bellmere police station, with a window that looked out at the back of a laundromat. He was in his late 40s, thin, with a habit of writing things down longhand while you talked, and then reading them back to you in a flat voice to see if you would correct yourself. Trevor sat in that office on Tuesday morning for 2 hours. Start from when you pulled onto the street, Mercer said. Not from what you think it means, just what you saw. So Trevor told it. The backpack, the jacket, the dirt on her cheek, the cold hands, the dish towel, the beer, the 20 minutes it had taken them to arrive at a hospital 20 minutes away. Mercer wrote it all down. You said the paramedic recognized her. That's what he told me. Did he say from where? He said he couldn't discuss another patient. He said several years ago. Mercer's pen stopped for a moment. All right, he said and wrote that down too. Over the next 2 weeks, Detective Mercer interviewed everyone. He interviewed Candace first, in an interview room with a camera in the corner, and she came with her hair done and a cardigan and a manila envelope of her own. She insisted Lila had been difficult. She used the word 12 times. Mercer counted because that was the kind of man he was. She said Lila had been diagnosed with anxiety. She produced a printout. Mercer read it and noticed it was a visit summary, not a diagnosis, and that the line she was pointing at was a parent-reported concern. She said Lila had collapsed after refusing dinner. Bryce Callahan came in the following day with a story that was nearly the same, and that was the problem. Nearly. Bryce said Lila had complained about feeling dizzy before dinner. He said it casually, as a way of showing he had been paying attention. He did not realize he had just moved the entire timeline. Mercer put the 2 transcripts side by side on his desk and drew a line between them with a ruler. Candace, refused dinner, then collapsed. Bryce, dizzy before dinner, then outside. Then Candace, in her second interview, claimed Lila had been outside for almost an hour. She said it to explain how cold the child had been. She said it because she had been asked about it, and because she had needed an answer. The house across the street from 14 Hollis Court had a doorbell camera. The owner was a retired postal worker named Dale who had installed it after a package theft in the spring and who was delighted to be asked for the footage. The footage showed the front door of the Callahan house at an angle, through a gap between 2 parked cars. At 4:02 p.m., Lila came out the front door. She was moving slowly. She sat down on the step with her backpack still on her shoulders. At 4:07, her posture changed. She slumped sideways against the door frame. At 4:11, she went down. At 4:18, Trevor's truck turned onto the street. Less than 10 minutes. Not almost an hour. Mercer watched that footage 9 times. Then he called Trevor and asked him to come in and watch it once, because Trevor was going to see it eventually and it was better to see it in a room with a door that closed. Trevor watched his daughter fall asleep on a concrete step. He watched her try to sit up once, at 4:09, and fail. He did not make a sound. When it was over, he asked Mercer to play it again, and Mercer did, and Trevor watched it a second time, and then he said, "The door doesn't open." "No," Mercer said. "It doesn't. For 16 minutes, that door doesn't open." "That's correct." Trevor sat back in the chair. "She was drying dishes," he said. "She had a towel in her hand when she opened the door. That's a kitchen at the back of that house. There's a window over the sink that faces the backyard, not the street." He looked up. She wasn't looking for her. Mercer made a note. "Anything else you remember about the interior of that house?" "I haven't been inside in 2 years and 3 months." "Why not?" "Because there was an incident in the driveway in June of the year we separated, and my attorney told me to make all exchanges at the curb and never step onto the property. So I never have. Mercer wrote that down and underlined it. That's going to be useful, he said. There was one more thing, and Mercer found it himself. He pulled Lila's medical records under a court order, and what came back was not a file. It was 3 files from 3 different practices. In the previous 14 months, Candace had taken Lila to 3 separate doctors. The first was the pediatrician Lila had seen since she was born. Candace had brought her in twice, in March and April, reporting that Lila was exhausted, was falling asleep at school, and was difficult to control at home. The physical exams were normal. Blood work was ordered and never completed. The second practice was a family clinic on the far side of the county. Candace had brought Lila there in June. She had reported anxiety, sleep disturbance, and behavioral outbursts. She had asked, directly, whether there was anything to help her calm down. The third was a walk-in clinic in a strip mall 2 towns over. August. Same complaints. Different words. Not one of them had found a clear medical reason for anything. Mercer read the notes carefully. He was looking for what doctors write when they are uneasy and cannot say so plainly. He found it in 2 places. The pediatrician, in April, had written, "Mother appears unusually focused on behavioral explanations despite normal examination. Child presents cooperative and appropriate in office. Will reevaluate if symptoms persist." The family clinic physician, in June, had written, "Father reports child behaves normally during his custody periods." Mercer stopped at that one and read it twice. He picked up the phone and called Trevor. "Did you ever speak to a Dr. Iyer at Westfield Family Care?" "No," Trevor said. "I've never heard that name." "You're sure?" "I'm certain. I've never spoken to any doctor about Lila except the one at the hospital last week and the pediatrician when she was 4 and had an ear infection." Mercer looked at the note again. "Father reports child behaves normally during his custody periods." "Detective?" "She quoted you," Mercer said slowly. "She sat in that office and quoted you to the doctor as an argument. She was using the fact that Lila is fine at your house as evidence that the problem is behavioral." Trevor was silent on the line for a long moment. "She was building a file," he said. "She was building a story," Mercer said. "Files are what I build." The pattern was becoming clearer. A mother shopping for a diagnosis. A child who was fine 2 weekends a month and exhausted the rest of the time. A history of complaints with no findings. But Mercer had been a detective for 19 years, and he knew exactly what he had. He had suspicion. Suspicion was not evidence. Suspicion did not survive a defense attorney. Suspicion did not get a 9-year-old girl protected by anything more durable than a temporary order that could be argued away in 90 days. He needed something physical. He was still thinking about that on the Thursday afternoon when the hospital lab called Dr. Hartwell, and Dr. Hartwell called Trevor Hensley. Trevor was standing in the cereal aisle of the Bellmere Foodway with Lila beside him when his phone rang. She was holding a box she had picked out herself, the sugary kind he normally said no to, and he had said yes to it that morning because he had been saying yes to almost everything for 11 days, and he knew it, and he did not care. The screen said Bellmere Memorial. "Lila, stay right here." He walked 6 feet to the end of the aisle where he could still see her. "This is Trevor Hensley." "Mr. Hensley, this is Dr. Hartwell. Is this a good time?" "Yes. We found something." Trevor put his free hand on the shelf. "What?" "The extended toxicology panel came back this afternoon. There is evidence of a sedating medication in her system. It's a prescription drug in the benzodiazepine family. I'm not going to give you the brand name over the phone because I want it documented properly, but I want you to know today." Trevor watched his daughter reading the back of a cereal box, her lips moving slightly. "Was she prescribed it?" "No. There is no prescription for Lila for that medication or for anything in that class in any record I have access to. And there wouldn't be. We do not prescribe that drug to 9-year-olds outside of very specific hospital settings." "Could it have been accidental?" "It's possible." Dr. Hartwell did not rush the answer, and Trevor respected that. Children get into cabinets. It happens every week in this country, but the amount is concerning. Concerning how? Concerning in the sense that this was not a single half-tablet swallowed by a curious child on the afternoon in question. She paused. "There are indications of exposure over a longer period. I want to be careful because that determination is going to require additional analysis, and I am not going to overstate it. But I'm telling you what my clinical impression is. Trevor closed his eyes. Every Sunday drop-off, every Friday pickup where she was quiet in the truck, every joke he had made about her turning into a teenager. Could she have taken it herself? Given her age, that's something we'd investigate, and we will. 9 is old enough to open a bottle, but 9 is also old enough to tell us, and she says she didn't. Hartwell's voice softened by a degree. Mr. Hensley, I've made a mandatory report. That happened before I called you. I want you to hear the next part clearly, because it matters. Go ahead. Don't confront anyone. Don't call anyone. Don't send a text message that says what you're thinking right now. Trevor opened his eyes. I wasn't going to. People usually do. I'm not people, Trevor said. I'll call the detective. He hung up. He stood in the cereal aisle of a grocery store on a Thursday afternoon, and he felt something happen inside his chest that he would never be able to describe accurately afterward. It was not rage. Rage was hot and stupid, and it made men do things that lost them custody hearings. It was the opposite of rage. It was a door closing quietly and locking. He walked back to Lila. Hey. She looked up. Can we get the marshmallow one too? Get both. 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 She grinned. She had lost a tooth 2 days earlier, and the grin had a gap in it. Trevor put his hand on the back of her head and held it there for a second longer than he needed to. Then he went out to the parking lot and called Detective Mercer. The search happened on Saturday morning, with a warrant executed properly at 14 Hollis Court. Trevor was not there. He was told about it afterward, in Mercer's office, in the flat voice Mercer used for facts. They found a prescription bottle in the bathroom cabinet on the second floor, on the shelf above the sink. Candace had an explanation ready before they had finished bagging it. She said the medicine belonged to Bryce. She said he had trouble sleeping, that he had for years, that it was his, and it had nothing to do with anyone else in that house. Bryce confirmed it, standing in his own hallway in a t-shirt at 8 in the morning, and he confirmed it too fast and too completely. The name on the label was Bryce Callahan. For about 6 hours, that looked like the end of it. Then investigators checked the prescription against the pharmacy record, and the whole thing came apart. Mercer laid it out for Trevor on the desk, 1 page at a time, the way a man deals cards. The medication was prescribed to Bryce Callahan. That part is true. It was prescribed in January. All right. Candace told us in her interview that the bottle in that cabinet was the same one he'd had since the prescription was written. She was specific about that because she was trying to explain why an old bottle was sitting where a child could reach it. Mercer slid a page across. That bottle was filled on the 22nd of August. Trevor looked at the date. 7 weeks before. 7 weeks before your daughter collapsed on that step. It's a refill. It's the 3rd refill on that prescription this year. Mercer tapped the page. And here's the part that matters. He slid over a second sheet. It was a pharmacy pickup log with a signature line. Bryce Callahan did not pick up that refill. He didn't pick up the one before it either. Trevor read the name on the signature line. Candace Callahan. She picked it up, Mercer said. All 3 times. She could say she was doing him a favor. She did say that. Mercer allowed himself something that was almost a smile, and it was not a warm one. Word for word, that's what she said. She said she was in town anyway, and she picked it up for him because his back was bothering him, which is a fine explanation, and it might have held. He slid a 3rd page across. That's the count. Trevor looked at it. Explain it to me. 30 tablets dispensed on August 22nd. 1 tablet at bedtime is needed, which is the instruction on the label. Bryce Callahan told us he takes 1 most nights, some nights 2 if it's bad. Mercer sat back. 55 days between the fill date and the search. Even at 2 a night, every single night, which is not what he described, he could not have finished that bottle. How many were in it? 4. Trevor set the page down. 4, he repeated. 26 tablets are unaccounted for over 55 days. And the man whose name is on the bottle described a usage pattern that doesn't come close to explaining it. Mercer folded his hands. That's not proof of what happened to your daughter. I want you to understand the difference. A defense attorney will stand up and say the man lost pills, or took more than he admits, or spilled them in a sink. But it's a hole. It's a hole they have to climb out of. and they have to climb out of it while explaining a doorbell camera, a school file, 3 clinics, and a toxicology report. Mercer picked up his pen. Mr. Hensley, I've been doing this a long time. I'm going to tell you something I don't usually tell people at this stage. Trevor waited. Cases like this fall apart because the child recants. Because the mother is sympathetic and the story is complicated and juries do not want to believe it. I have watched it happen. Mercer set the pen down. So I'm going to keep pulling on this until either it comes apart in my hands or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, then someone is going to have a very bad year. Trevor stood up and put on his jacket. She's going to say she was overwhelmed, he said. She's going to say she was a single mother doing her best, and she made a mistake with the dose. That's what she's going to say. Mercer looked up. You know her well. I was married to her for 11 years. Then you'd better be ready for her to call you. Trevor stopped at the door. She already has, he said. 9 times. I haven't answered. He went out to his truck and drove to the school to pick up his daughter, and he was there 15 minutes early, and he sat in the parking lot with his hands on the wheel and watched the doors until she came through them. Trevor had spent weeks preparing himself for a particular kind of fight. He understood exactly what he thought was coming. It was going to be his word against hers. He was the ex-husband. He was the man who had lost the custody argument 3 years earlier. He was going to sit in a room and say what he believed had happened, and Candace was going to sit in the same room and cry, and 12 people were going to look at a mother and a father and decide which one they liked better. He was wrong. It did not come down to his word at all. It came down to a 56-year-old paramedic who could not sleep. Gordon Reeves called the Bellmere police station on a Tuesday evening in late October, at the end of a 14-hour shift, and asked to speak to whoever was handling the Hensley case. He came in the next morning in civilian clothes. Jeans, a flannel shirt, a cup of gas station coffee he never drank. He sat down across from Detective Mercer and said, I've been sitting on this for 3 weeks, and I've talked to my union rep and my supervisor, and I've decided I'd rather be wrong out loud than right in quiet. Mercer turned on the recorder. Tell me what you know. Gordon told him. 9 years earlier, he had been working a night shift out of a station in a different county, 40 minutes north of Bellmere. He had responded to a call at a rented house on a rural road. The call had come from a neighbor, not from inside the house. A 15-year-old girl had been found on the bathroom floor, severely drowsy, difficult to rouse, cold to the touch. There had been a woman in the house, the girl's mother's partner's girlfriend, or something with that many steps in it. Gordon had not been able to keep the relationship straight at the time and had written down what he was told. The woman had stood in the hallway while he worked, and she had said the girl was pretending. That's the word she used, Gordon said. Pretending. Not fainted. Not sick. Not overdosed. Pretending. And I've been doing this since I was 24, detective, and I've heard people say a lot of things when they're scared. Scared people say stupid things. That's normal. He turned the coffee cup on the table. That woman wasn't scared. She was annoyed that we'd come. You're certain it's the same woman? I saw her on that walkway on Hollis Court, and I felt sick before I knew why. Gordon looked up. Her hair's different. She's older. She's got a different last name now, I'd assume. But she stood the same way. Arms folded. Same 3 feet back from the kid. And she said almost the same thing. Did you file a report at the time? I filed my run report. Vitals, treatment, transport. And I told the receiving nurse I didn't like the scene. He shrugged, and there was old anger in it. There was a report. There was an investigation, I think. Nothing came of it. The girl went home to somebody, I don't know who. We got another call 20 minutes later, and I never heard another word about it. That's how it works. You hand them off at the door, and the story stops being yours. Mercer pulled the old case in 3 days. It took 3 days because it had been filed in a different county under a different name, and because Candace had used her maiden name in that household. When it came across his desk, Mercer read it with the door shut. The similarities were disturbing. The girl in that report had been 15. Her name was in the file, and Mercer would not repeat it outside of the case. She had experienced months of unexplained fatigue. She had missed 41 days of school in a single year. She had been described by 2 teachers as checked out. She had told a school nurse that she thought someone was giving her something that made her sleepy. The nurse had written it down. The note existed. It had been in a file for 9 years. And the woman in the household had insisted, repeatedly, that the girl was seeking attention. The old case had gone nowhere. The girl had been moved to a relative's home in another state 4 months later, for unrelated reasons, and the investigation had died the way those investigations die. Not with a decision, but with a lack of one. No charges. No finding. A folder closed and shelved. There had not been enough evidence. There had been one drowsy teenager, one strange note, and one adult who explained everything smoothly. Now there was a second child. Mercer laid the two files side by side on his desk on a Friday afternoon, 9 years apart, and he sat looking at them for a long time. A child who could not stay awake. An adult insisting on a behavioral explanation. A statement from the child that someone was giving her something. And, this time, medical evidence. This time, a toxicology report from a hospital laboratory with a chain of custody and a pharmacy log with a signature on it and a doorbell camera with a timestamp. The old incident had been a dead end for 9 years. On its own, it proved nothing. It could not be charged. It could not, on its own, have convicted anyone of anything. But it was no longer on its own. That was the part Trevor never saw coming. Mercer explained it to him in the same office on the same afternoon, with the two folders on the desk between them. "I want to be careful here," Mercer said, "because I don't want you leaving this room thinking we have more than we have. The old case is not a charge. It's not evidence that she did anything to your daughter. Then what is it? It's context. And in a case like this, context is the whole game." Mercer turned one of the folders around. Everything her attorney is going to argue depends on this being a one-time thing that got misunderstood. An accident. A stressed mother. A cabinet left open. That argument works exactly once. Trevor understood. It stops being an accident when it's the second one. It stops being an accident when a paramedic who has never met you can describe your ex-wife's behavior 9 years ago, and it matches word for word what he saw on her front walk this month. Mercer closed the folder. Prosecutors can use prior conduct in specific circumstances. Whether this comes in as a fight for a judge, not for me. But even if a judge keeps it out entirely, it changed how this investigation was run. It told me what I was looking at. It told me not to accept the easy answer. Trevor sat with that. He thought about Gordon Reeves standing at the back of an ambulance in the rain, saying, "I'd strongly recommend you tell the hospital everything you know." He thought about how close it had come to being nothing. If a different crew had been on shift, if the older man had been on a different rotation, if Gordon Reeves had decided, at the end of a 14-hour day, that it was not his business. Trevor had spent 3 years believing he was alone in what he suspected, but could not name. He had not been alone. He had simply been 9 years too late to a story someone else had already witnessed the first chapter of. "Detective," he said, "that girl, the one from before." Mercer looked up. "Is she all right?" Mercer was quiet for a moment. "She's 24, he said. "She's alive. I made a phone call. That's all I'm going to tell you." Trevor nodded and did not ask again. He drove home and sat in his truck outside his apartment building for 10 minutes before he went up. Candace's own history had built the bridge that investigators needed. She had done that herself. 9 years ago, in a rented house on a country road, in front of a man who happened to remember faces. Bryce Callahan figured out that he was in trouble somewhere around the second week of November. It was not the search that did it. It was not the interviews. It was a single sentence in a letter from the county prosecutor's office, forwarded to him by the criminal defense attorney he had hired with money he did not have. He was not being treated as a witness anymore. Trevor heard about the change from Mercer, who mentioned it the way a man mentions weather. "Callahan has counsel now. Good counsel. He stopped talking to us directly." "Is that bad?" "It's the opposite," Mercer said. "Men who hire that particular attorney are men who have been told they have exposure. And men with exposure eventually get very interested in what they can trade." The other thing Bryce did was quieter and more revealing. He stopped answering Candace's calls. Trevor learned this from Candace herself, because on the 19th of November, at 9:20 at night, she finally called from a number he did not recognize, and he answered it. He had not planned to. Lila was asleep. He was standing at the kitchen counter with a dish towel over his shoulder, and he thought about that towel as he picked up the phone. "Trevor." He knew the voice instantly. He said nothing. "Trevor, don't hang up. Please." He sat down at the small kitchen table. There was a drawing of a horse taped to the refrigerator behind him. He had not put it there. Lila had. "I'm here." Candace let out a breath. He could hear a television somewhere behind her, and the particular echo of a room without much furniture in it. He wondered, distantly, where she was living now. "I need you to tell the detective this was a misunderstanding." Trevor sat silently. "I know how it looks," she said. "I know exactly how it looks, and I know what you must be thinking about me. And I'm not asking you to like me. I'm asking you to be fair. You were always fair, Trevor. Even when we were at our worst, you were fair. And everybody is treating me like—" She stopped. Started again. "You know I would never hurt Lila." Trevor turned the phone slightly and looked at the horse drawing. "You don't need me to say anything," he said. "What?" "You said you need me to tell the detective it was a misunderstanding." "You don't need me. What I say doesn't decide this. The pharmacy log decides it. The camera across the street decides it. Trevor, I'm telling you that so you stop wasting phone calls. Please." Her voice broke, and he could not tell whether it was real. And after 11 years of marriage, he was no longer confident he had ever been able to tell. "Please. One statement. You just have to say you don't believe I would do this. That's all. That's all it would take." "No." The words sat there. "We're both her parents," Candace said. "That's why I won't lie." She began to cry. It was a small, contained sound, and it went on for several seconds. And Trevor let it go on and did not fill the silence and did not soften. "You'll lose everything," she said finally. He almost laughed, and the fact that he almost did surprised him. "No." He kept his voice level. "I won't. I'll lose everything." She said it fast, correcting herself, the truth arriving a half-second behind the manipulation. "Trevor, I will lose everything. My job, my house, my daughter. Do you understand that? Everything I have." "You should have thought about that," Trevor said, "before Lila lost her ability to feel safe in her own home." The crying stopped like a tap being shut. "You think you're better than me." "No. You do. You've always thought it. 11 years of that face you make. I don't think I'm better than you." "Then what?" Her voice had gone hard and fast. "What is this, Trevor? You've got her. You won. Is that what you needed? Is that what all of this is?" Trevor stood up and walked to the window of his apartment. Below, the parking lot lights buzzed over wet asphalt. In the room behind him, his daughter was asleep with a lamp on because she still would not sleep in the dark. He thought about how many times he had answered a call like this and ended it by agreeing to something. "Not tonight. Not ever again. I just stopped protecting you," he said. The line was quiet. "For 3 years, I made excuses for you," Trevor went on. "Not to you. To myself. When she was too tired to walk to the car, I told myself she'd had a long week. When she cried on Sunday nights, I told myself she just missed me. When the school didn't call, I told myself no news was good news. Every single time there was a choice between believing my daughter and keeping the peace with you, I kept the peace. That's not fair. It's completely fair. It's the only thing in this whole mess that is." His voice did not rise. "So no, Candace, I'm not better than you. I let this happen for a very long time, but I'm done covering the gap between what you say and what's true, and I'm never doing it again, and there is nothing you can say on this phone call that will change that. Trevor, don't call this number." He hung up. He put the phone face down on the counter and stood there for a while with both hands on the edge of the sink. Then he went into Lila's room and stood in the doorway. The lamp threw soft light across the pillow. She had one arm around a stuffed rabbit she had not slept with since she was 6 and had dug out of a closet in October. Trevor stood there for a long time. He did not feel triumphant. He felt like a man who had finally put down something heavy he should never have picked up. 2 weeks later, Bryce Callahan's attorney contacted the prosecutor's office. The final evidence did not come from Bryce. It came from Candace's own phone. Investigators had seized it during the October search, but a seized phone is a locked box, and locked boxes require warrants, and warrants require specificity. Mercer had spent 7 weeks getting the language right, then another 3 waiting on the extraction. The report landed on his desk on the 9th of December. He read it in one sitting. Then he called the prosecutor. Then he called Trevor and asked him to come in, and told him to come alone, and told him he did not have to read any of it if he did not want to. Trevor read all of it. There were thousands of messages. Most of them were nothing. Grocery lists, complaints about co-workers, an argument about a leaking dishwasher that ran for 2 days. Mercer had flagged 11 exchanges. The first was from March. Candace to Bryce at 6:40 in the evening. She's too difficult tonight. I can't do this. Bryce. So handle it. There were versions of that same exchange scattered across 8 months. Lila is being too difficult. Lila won't settle. I can't do this tonight. Each one occurring, Mercer had noted in the margin, on a weekday evening. Never on a Friday when Trevor came. Trevor read them slowly, and the thing that struck him hardest was how ordinary they were. There was no malice in the language. There was only irritation. The kind of irritation a person expresses about traffic. The second cluster was about him. Candace. Make sure he doesn't overreact when he picks her up. Keep it short. Bryce. He's not going to notice anything. Candace. He notices everything, and then he talks himself out of it. Trevor read that line 4 times. He notices everything, and then he talks himself out of it. She had known. She had known exactly what he did, and she had built a plan on top of it, and it had worked for 2.5 years because she was right about him. He set the page down and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes for a moment. Then he picked it up again. Keep going, he said. Mercer turned to the last section. These are from the 18th of August, he said. 4 days before the refill was picked up. Bryce had written, Are you sure this is enough? Candace had answered, She'll sleep. That's all. Bryce. And if he notices? Candace. He always believes I'm exaggerating. Trevor stared at the 4 lines for a long time. They were not a confession. Not exactly. A defense attorney could stand up and argue about what this meant and what enough meant, and whether she'll sleep referred to a child or a dog or a decision to stop arguing about bedtime. But those messages could not be reconciled with what Candace and Bryce had already told investigators, under recording twice each. They had both said, separately, that neither of them had ever given Lila any medication of any kind. Those 4 lines destroyed that. More than that, they destroyed the accident. An accident does not get discussed in advance. An accident does not have a message 4 days earlier asking whether the amount is enough. An accident does not include a plan for what to do if the father notices. Mercer closed the folder. Callahan's attorney saw a preview of this last Thursday, he said. He came back Monday morning. He talked. Bryce Callahan admitted, in a recorded interview with counsel present, that he had known Candace was giving Lila medication. He said he had known since the spring. He said it had started as something to help her sleep, that it had been framed to him as temporary, that he had asked about it a few times and been told to stay out of it. He said he had never administered it himself. He said, and this was the part he came back to over and over, that he had not expected the girl to become unconscious. He said he had thought it was a small amount. He said he had assumed a mother knew what she was doing with her own child. Mercer, watching the recording later with the prosecutor, said only, he's not lying about the part where he didn't care. The admission was critical. It was a second adult in that household confirming, on the record, that medication was being given to a child who had no prescription for it. It corroborated the toxicology. It corroborated the pharmacy log. It corroborated the messages. It removed the last honest doubt. Candace was arrested on the 17th of December at 7:10 in the morning. Trevor was not there. He learned about it from a text message from Mercer that said only, It's done. Call me when you can. He was making Lila's lunch when it came through. He read it, put the phone in his pocket, and finished cutting the sandwich in half diagonally, because that was how she liked it and it mattered to her more than it should have. Dad, Lila said from the table. You okay? Trevor looked at her. He thought about telling her. He thought about how much of the last 3 months she had already had to carry. I'm okay, he said. Eat your breakfast. Bus in 10. He drove her to school himself that morning anyway. He always did now. The trial began in June, 8 months after the afternoon Trevor had turned on a Hollis Court and seen a pink backpack lying in the grass. He sat in the second row on the left side of the courtroom for 11 days. Candace looked completely different. It was not only the county clothing or the fact that she had lost weight. It was the confidence. That had been the first thing about her. Always. The thing that had made a 23-year-old Trevor Hensley cross a room at a wedding reception to talk to her. She had walked into every space in her life, as though it had been reserved for her. It was gone. She sat with her hands in her lap and her shoulders rounded, and she looked at the table. For 8 months, she had insisted that everyone had misunderstood her. She had said it to detectives, to her attorney, to a caseworker, to her own sister, who eventually stopped taking her calls. But the evidence had become impossible to explain away. The prosecutor built it in order, the way you build a wall. The medical records from 3 different practices, read aloud, with the dates showing how the complaints escalated each time a doctor found nothing wrong. The pharmacy records with the signature and the count and the 55 days. The toxicology report, explained by a laboratory director in careful language that took 40 minutes and never once raised its voice. Megan Prescott's counseling notes, entered as exhibits, and Megan on the stand saying, quietly, that she had written down a question a 9-year-old had asked her in May and had thought about it every day since. The doorbell camera footage, played twice, on a screen the jury could not look away from. 16 minutes. A child slumping sideways against a door that never opened. The messages. Gordon Reeves testified on the 6th day. He wore a jacket that did not fit him well, and he answered every question in the same flat, careful way he had used at the back of his ambulance. And when the defense attorney suggested he might be mistaken about a face from 9 years ago, he said, "I might be. I've thought about that. That's why I said it out loud instead of keeping it to myself." Bryce Callahan testified on the 8th day, under an agreement, and would not look at the woman he had married. And Lila's statement was played on the 9th day. She did not testify in the courtroom. She had been interviewed months earlier at a children's advocacy center by a trained specialist, on video, in a room with a rug and a low table. Trevor had not been allowed to be in that room. He watched the recording with everyone else. His daughter, small on a large screen, twisting her hands in her lap, explaining in the plain language of a 9-year-old what bedtime had been like in her mother's house. The drink she was told to finish. The taste she did not like. The morning she could not get up. The way she had learned to stop mentioning it because mentioning it made things worse. Trevor kept his eyes on the screen and his hands flat on his knees, and he did not make a sound. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found Candace guilty of the charges brought against her. She was sentenced in August. The judge spoke for 9 minutes before announcing the term. Trevor remembered one sentence of it, that the court had considered the defendant's argument that she had been overwhelmed and had weighed it against a period of many months and a pattern of concealment, and had not found it persuasive. She was sentenced to prison. Bryce also faced criminal consequences for his role. His cooperation earned him a lesser outcome, which the prosecutor explained to Trevor beforehand, and which Trevor accepted without comment. It was a trade. Trades are how these things get done. Trevor never celebrated. There was no moment on the courthouse steps where he felt anything lift. A man he did not know shook his hand and said congratulations, and Trevor thanked him and felt nothing at all. This was not a victory he had wanted. It was simply the consequence of what they had done, arriving late, the way consequences do. Outside, reporters waited at the bottom of the steps with a camera and a microphone and a question about how he felt. Trevor ignored them. He walked straight through, past the microphone, past the man calling his name. Lila was standing at the corner beside Megan Prescott, in a yellow shirt, holding a paper cup of lemonade she had gotten from somewhere. She saw him, and she ran. Trevor dropped to one knee on the sidewalk and caught her, and she hugged him hard around the neck with the lemonade still in one hand, cold against his collar. "Are we going home?" Trevor smiled for the first time in 11 days. "Yeah, your house." He pulled back and looked at her. She was taller than she had been in October. She had a scab on one knee from a bicycle and a friend named Priya and a library book overdue by 2 weeks. "Our home," he said. She smiled. That evening, Trevor made pancakes for dinner because Lila asked and because there was no reason on earth to say no. He was not very good at it. He never had been. He got the heat too high, and the first batch came out of the pan dark on one side and raw in the middle. Lila leaned over the counter and looked at the plate. "You're terrible at this." Trevor laughed. It came out of him unexpectedly, and it felt strange in his chest, like using a muscle after a long injury. "I know. Like really terrible." I said, "I know." She laughed too, and it was a full laugh, loud in a small kitchen, and it went on longer than the joke deserved. It was the sound he had been waiting months to hear. They ate the next batch at the counter with too much syrup, And Lila talked about a girl in her class who could touch her nose with her tongue, and Trevor listened to every word of it. Later that night, she asked for tape. She put a drawing on the refrigerator. She had made it at school in the spring and had been carrying it around in her folder since. It showed a girl holding a man's hand. The girl had orange hair, which Lila did not have, and the man was much taller than the girl, which was accurate. Above them was a blue sky with a yellow sun in the corner and 3 birds shaped like the letter M. At the bottom, in pencil, in careful letters, she had written, "Dad believed me." Trevor stood in front of the refrigerator for a long time after she went to bed. He thought about the 11 days in that courtroom. He thought about a paramedic who had decided to speak up at the end of a 14-hour shift. He thought about a school counselor who had kept notes. And he thought about the part he would never entirely put down, that his daughter had written those 3 words because believing her had been remarkable, because it had not been guaranteed, because for 2.5 years he had been the one who talked himself out of it. He would carry that. He had decided to carry it rather than forgive himself for it, because carrying it was the only thing that guaranteed he would never do it again. He did not forgive Candace either. People had suggested he might, eventually. A counselor had used the word closure. Trevor had listened politely and thought that closure was a word invented by people who had never had to look at a doorbell camera. He never planned to forgive her. Not in a year. Not in 20. But he did not need revenge, and he never had. He had never once wished her harm in the way that men in bars talk about wishing harm. She had already lost the life she had tried so hard to control. She had built that life out of explanations, and the explanations had run out, and everything on top of them had come down. Trevor had something better than revenge. His daughter was safe. She slept 8 hours a night. She ate 2 helpings at dinner. She had stopped apologizing for things that were not her fault, mostly, and when she did it anyway, he corrected her gently, every time. He turned off the kitchen light. Down the hall, Lila's door was open a few inches, and the lamp beside her bed was off. She had turned it off herself. Trevor stood in the dark hallway of a small apartment in Bellmere, Ohio, and listened to his daughter breathe. For the first time in a very long time, she was not afraid to go home.